And I think we're good to go, Rebecca, when everyone call the meeting to order.
All right, perfect. We'll call to order at 7:03 for Public Safety Committee meeting. We'll start with roll call. I believe we have everyone here, but do you want me to read through names?
If you want to, otherwise I can just write them down by going through the screen.
Sure. Okay, let's do that just for ease. Next, public comment. I don't believe I see anyone on from the public. Is that correct?
Yep, I didn't have anybody in the waiting room from the public.
Okay, great. So then we'll move on to approval of minutes. I hope everyone had a chance to review the minutes that were circulated, I think yesterday or 2 days ago. Any corrections or edits to the minutes? No? With that, can I have a motion to approve?
This is Emily. I'll make that motion.
Thank you.
Second.
Wonderful.
Or third to the second.
Fourth, no? Okay, thank you. So then we'll move right into, we're being efficient for December. I love this. Agenda item number 1, chief update with latest department stats and updates.
And Rebecca, can we back up just a minute? So I had Emily make the motion and Bartlett second the motion.
Yes.
And then did we have a vote at all?
Oh, I apologize. Sorry, I apologize. Look at, I've got too excited to be efficient. All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Perfect. Thank you, Chief Note Taker and Taskmaster. I appreciate it. With that, agenda 1, item number 1, update from Chief.
Sounds good. I'll kind of give some department updates, and I also provided all of you with our agency summary. Hopefully you had a chance to take a look at that, and I'll just kind of cover a few areas that kind of caught my attention when taking a look at that. But for agency updates, the budget process was recently completed. Unfortunately, the positions that we requested, the 2 police officers and the dispatcher position, were not approved in the budget. So we will go another year without adding any staff. In my 24 years with Middleton, this is probably the lowest number of police officers per 1,000 population that we've ever had in Middleton, which is a little bit concerning. Right now we're at 1.78 officers per 1,000 population. The national average is about 2.4. I think that's a little high for our department, but I would like us to see a little bit closer to the two officers per 1,000 population. So every year that we don't add a police officer, as we've mentioned before in this committee, we get a little bit closer. We dig that hole a little bit further down of becoming a little bit more reactive department instead of proactive, which is concerning to me. And I know there's been some discussions, and Emily can maybe jump in here if she has any thoughts on this too. There has been some discussions by City Council and others of going to referendum in 2022, asking city residents to exceed the tax levy limits to add public safety and other city staff as the city's growing, but because of limitations on the tax levy, the city's unable to add any city staff, including the police department. This is a major concern of mine. I think you've heard this from me numerous times. I kind of feel like I'm a broken record, but this is a priority. We have to start adding staff as the city is growing. All you have to do is drive up and down Parmenter Street and University Avenue, and you'll see how the city's growing, and that has an impact on the police department and EMS and all the first responders. And I'm concerned about the next couple of years as those apartments are starting to fill up, as the city continues to grow, and the impact it's going to have on the police department and the services that we can offer. So not great news from the budget, but it kind of expected. I guess the good news is that all of our capital budget items were approved. That includes finishing up the portable radio project that we started in 2020, and then a number of other small repairs and upgrades to our local radio system. So those are definitely positives. But again, the negative is that we didn't get our 2 positions and the dispatcher position that I had requested for our operating budget. Currently, we are at full staff, but we have 4 officers currently in field training, which is our 14-week-long field training program. Officer Javier Salazar is completing kind of the end of his field training program, and we're hoping he'll be solo patrol in the next couple weeks. And then we have Officer Nicholas Mazaga, Officer Nabi Mahdi, and Officer Kevin Thompson, who are currently in our field training program. And if everything goes well, we're hoping to have them in solo patrol and helping with our staffing needs sometime in early 2022. I know Captain Kukuski is really looking forward to getting these 4 officers out on solo patrol, as he's been doing a fantastic job filling all of the vacancies that we had based on family leave, injuries, and stuff like that. So to have these 4 officers out on solo patrol will greatly help us as we try to maintain 24-hour coverage and maintain our minimum staffing standards that we've had in place for many years.
Chief, are we gonna chat a little bit? Emily, I'm hoping you could talk a little. I mean, I had reached out to Mike Davis as well on that referendum. I think I'd like to make sure we help keep that momentum going. Can we talk about strategy and how to best support that effort, or?
That'd be great. Emily, go ahead. You might have more information on that.
Yeah, just so you guys know, I think it's in January, we're going to do a committee of the whole. I have dates nearby where it's not the mayor leading it, but it's the president of the council. And I think it's either that topic on that agenda or one in February. I think we have 2 meetings that are unusual in January. And one of them is going to be the staffing and referendum idea. It is something that, because of you guys, I've been pushing for, I think, well, pre-pandemic, so a little over 2 years. And there was an alder that reached out to me and said, would you support it? She called me and said, would you support it? And I said, well, what are you thinking? And so she pitched a different idea, which is all of the city. And I agree with that, but I said, it's going to be easier on doors in a pandemic to explain we have to have more police. If I'm talking about how we need this for this department and we need this for this department, if we have to pick one or the other at doors, and I'm talking to constituents, it's going to be easier to say emergency responders. We definitely have to look at that. Or like prioritize that, and then also city staff. So I think that is the tactic that the committee of the whole will be talking about, is how do you phrase it to the community so that they feel comfortable in the vote? Because if we're just saying, hey, we're going to raise your money because we're growing and we need more stuff, that may not pass. But if we're saying, hey, and for the people at doors, for the most part, in my district, I can't use the ratio that the chief is talking about, because they're not going to understand that. But they will understand when I talk about, well, we've been all seeing, the posts on Nextdoor about car thefts, and we've all been seeing, these little things going on. And if we want more police, patrolling, like we see them in the city, because a lot in my district, it's speeding and car thefts. And so if you're concerned about the people on Allen speeding or the people on University speeding, well, if we don't have enough police on the ground, then they can't be everywhere in Middleton. Because the other thing I've gotten from the other side of the city is, well, yeah, they're speeding over, on University and Century, but the real problem is the belt line. So if the police are over on University and Century, they're not on the belt line. I'm like, they can't be everywhere, So I think it's just something we have to be able to say in a 30-second door knock speech. I'm looking at Tom. He's on my screen right now. He understands. Pre-pandemic, I would knock doors, and Tom was probably with me knocking doors, being like, "Hey, what's important to you, right?" And what do people always say? It's whatever is happening in their neighborhood or happened to a friend. And so if we can keep it down to that community engagement level, I think they're going to understand that. And the same goes for the larger city staff. So you might see, like, if you're following the committee of the whole, like if you watch it or we get notes to you guys, the conversation may not be, are we going to referendum? The conversation might be like, maybe the committee, like the council as a whole, maybe 6 out of 8 are fine with it. They've thought it over. They know it. We keep saying no, but to stay in budget, but we need more. The question, I think, will then become, do we have a big ask and ask for the whole city do we prioritize the emergency responders and say, and some additional city staff for, as needed? Or do we go the whole end, or let's see, or just public safety, just emergency responders? Because I've been talking about police, but some of my constituents are worried about paramedics as well. And I'm like, okay, but that's all in that must have, because as we grow every 1,000, you do need people to be able to respond, and then the tools to give them. So I think I think what you guys might want to do is reach out to your own council person, man or woman, however we say that these days, and just say, hey, this is how I feel. I'm on public safety, and your feeling might be all city staff, but especially, like right now, let's get those police officers on the ground, paramedics, whatever it is. But you might also be like, hey, I understand, whatever your position is, but I really feel like, so if you're one of those three, I would, state what that is. And I'm not going to tell you what that is because that's yours. But you can say, I'm on public safety, but as a constituent, I feel this way. So I think that's it. I am thinking, Chief, would it be like November that it would be on the referendum? Because April's so close.
That's what I heard, is they would look for the election in the fall, which would be November.
That's going to be tough. I was hoping for an April referendum because we do have more locally engaged voters who understand. November elections brings out everybody. And if you're saying we're going to raise your taxes, sometimes that's not an easy one to push through, but that means we have to come down to messaging. So thanks for sharing that, Chief. Was there anything else I was supposed to cover?
No, that's it. I knew you had more information on that than I did. A couple other points that I was told with the referendum, and again, Emily, you might have more background on this than I do, but when they went for the water referendum a few years ago, I think it raised everybody's taxes per home about $20 or $30. So it's not a significant increase, but it is an increase. And that's probably what I think the referendum would be looking in that kind of ballpark for an increase per household to get the necessary funds to add, again, whether it's city staff or first responders, because I know there is going to be a need probably for more paramedics in the city as the city grows too. And then for Cornell and a few other newer committee members, just so you're aware of our staffing, we usually only have 4 officers typically working a given shift. So we don't have 10. Every once in a while, we might have a 5. But for the most part, it's usually 3 patrol officers and 1 supervisor working. So we don't have an abundance of folks just driving around. We get an injury accident, every single police officer is going to be tied up for a while. Right now, the case that the officers are working on, every officer in the city is currently tied up. So there's other calls that come in. If they're not priorities, they sit and wait for an officer to be available and free, or we ask for mutual aid from the sheriff's department or from Sherwood Hills or the Madison Police Department. So I think sometimes when I've talked to citizens, they think that we have 10 officers working at a given time. We do not. It's 1 supervisor and 3 patrol officer is our minimum staffing, and that's probably our average.
Can I ask a question? When was the last time the city did this kind of referendum? I know you just talked about the water one, but in terms of staffing, has anything been recent?
I don't think so.
No, I don't think
Certainly
it's
would
ever
not.
been done.
Yeah,
Never?
this
is
is
new
never.
territory.
That's my understanding. And it has to do with the levy limits,
Yeah.
which goes back to 2010. And if you all want the wonderful levy limit discussion, you can stay at the end and I will educate you. I've been given this spiel about 6 times. So I'm your lady to talk about that. But basically before we were growing enough as a city to have wiggle room. But the city had to grow all of its staff as it was growing. And so sometimes we didn't do the public safety pieces. But now we're not growing as much because we've run out of land, where places like Fitchburg and Sun Prairie, they've only built up some of theirs, so they have plenty of room to grow. So they're not in the same sort of budget limits. Yeah. So this is kind of where we're at, is that we have to ask for us to grow our staff. But I was going to say, Chief, just so you know, we're about to get 2 more apartment buildings on University in my district. So that might be not on your radar, because that like one has gone through planning and has been approved, but the other one is about to be pitched. So even though we have lots of apartments coming, we have more coming. So that feeds into your, we need to grow emergency responders.
Thanks, Emily. And Bartlett, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I was, I got my background because I'm just back from Hawaii, which wonderful. So just gonna throw that out there for you guys. But no, there was an incident. You know, I have several friends in the police force there. I was talking to them about how things are going, but I was on Waikiki, and every morning the officers come through and they deal with this very large homeless population, and they've got a kind of an understanding. And then one day, one of the guys didn't want to move and was causing problems, and they had to get 8 officers, and it took them 20 minutes through conversation. And then this just gradual, it wasn't even, I wouldn't say escalation, but just like, we're just surrounding you, we're giving you a giant hug. And finally they had to physically move him, and without getting into all the stuff, but it kind of tripped me out. Not, they did it so well, but the idea that it took 4 people actively on this person, one other getting out of the vehicle. I can't remember what the other 2 were doing. I mean, there were 8 officers all active. And I'm like, how would we even do that? And this guy was, you know, needed, it was an ugly scene. So I just, to your point, Chief, like, we have 4 officers usually on staff. There's more risk to the officers, and then more chance of issues when you can't just smother, was my feeling out of it.
That's a great point, Bartlett. And in a case like that, we obviously would try to slow things down and get more additional help from, again, our mutual aid partners, Madison, the Dane County Sheriff's Department, Sherwood Hills, Wanakee, those that are nearby. But those cities are also very busy, and they have calls for service too. So even though we can ask for mutual aid, we don't always get it either. Tom, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, I was just wanted to ask, I don't know if this is a good question or not, but you know, there's a lot of talk now going on about sharing or involving other departments like social services to help in certain types of cases. Is that an option that's available to us, or?
I'm currently working on something with one of our local businesses, actually Miramont. We're looking at establishing some type of partnership moving forward, but we got to work through some things to finalize that. But Madison Police Department has that. The Dane County Sheriff's Department, Sun Prairie is looking to start some type of social worker involved in their department this year. And that is something that I'm interested in, but again, that comes at a cost. Sun Prairie's budgeted $50,000, which is half of a police officer position. And I don't think I could even get $50,000 in the budget at this point for operating for asking for a half-time social worker position. But I am in some discussions. I'm working on a plan right now. Whether they'll be finalized next year, I'm not sure, but that is something I am interested to divert some of those mental health calls that I would say are chronic callers, but people who are really suffering a mental crisis, that will have 3 or 4 calls for service in a given shift from them. You know, they think somebody's outside of their house stalking them. I can think of one case where they thought the Russian mob was outside their home, and we got repeated calls in a given 8-hour time period. Those are the cases that I would like to get diverted to some type of social worker or somebody who could just reach out to them to try to work through some of those mental health issues and try to get them those resources. That I think we've done a really good job over the years of doing that, but maybe this individual would have different resources, a different approach, and would be able to handle those situations and divert those calls from the police department. So definitely something, Tom, that's a great question, something we're looking at. It's just, again, there's a cost to that too.
Maybe we could ask for it as part of our referendum if it's a half a person.
Yeah.
You know, maybe that's how we could couch some of our concern from our constituents, Tom. So I think it's great that you're bringing up these ideas.
Yep. All right, if we have no other questions on the referendum, I'll get into our agency summary for, this is the report for October. So the November report I would get in a few days. Obviously, it's not ready yet for this meeting, but this is the October report and our calls for service. I'll just highlight a few areas. Our calls for service, as you've probably seen, are down slightly yet. I still contribute this to COVID. It's still slightly lower than it was in 2018 and 2019, higher than 2020. And I really think that we'll be back in 2022 and 2023 to some normal levels. Again, as the city grows and as we kind of come out of the COVID, what I call the COVID hangover, where people are still at home. There's not as much activity yet, but we definitely are seeing an uptick in our calls and getting closer to where we were prior to COVID. As you notice, I'll get down to the violent crimes. They're up a little bit. Our violent incidents are up a little bit compared to 2019 and 2018. 2020, if you recall, again, we had a number of weapon violations. We had a number of incidents where shots were fired throughout the city. Random homes were hit with gunfire. If you look at some of the municipalities, Fitchburg, Sun Prairie, Madison, that's continuing in their jurisdictions. Fortunately for us, it has not continued in 2021. I'd like to say that we wouldn't experience that type of violence again, but I can tell you it's just a matter of time before we do. There's been some pretty significant cases. I think if you look at the news every single day, there's shots fired, there's theft from autos, there's stolen vehicles fleeing from police, crashing. It will hit our city again, and we definitely have seen an uptick of theft of autos in the last week or two, where I think we've had 3 or 4 vehicles stolen. One while an individual was running into a local business to get food, and when they came out to their car was stolen, and just was recovered a few days ago. So again, the violent crime is up a little bit for us, not drastically, but it is up compared to 2020. Or it will be by the end of the year. You can see we're at already 109 in 2020. We ended at 115, so we'll definitely be up above 115. And again, just for
The abduction line item was a surprise.
What's that, Rebecca? Sorry.
Abduction line item at 8.
Yes, I'm gonna explain that again.
Okay.
That is not. I was going to give you the disclaimer is that abduction is. It's not really accurate. So false imprisonment, so we have cases of domestic disturbances, and one of the charges that we charge an individual is false imprisonment. And unfortunately, there is no heading for false imprisonment. It falls under the abduction category. So we have not had 8 abductions. We are working with our data analysts to try to correct that, because obviously that's a concern of ours and a concern to everybody else who looks at this report as they look at it on our webpage. Is 8 abductions. We have not had 8 abductions. Those are false imprisonment charges that there's no other category that falls under. And that's an issue with the state and the federal system and how we report those crimes. But yes, that's a great question. We have not had 8 abductions.
Okay.
I think.
A question.
Go ahead, Kathleen.
So I'm trying to reconcile on page 3. It's not the page you're on right now. But so page 3, that one, if you look at the violent incident numbers, oh, wait, okay, oh, okay.
Is it that one?
So actually the page before that with the blue chart.
Okay.
So do you see the second, it says violent, and then it has numbers 66, 63, 96, 103. And then when you go to the next slide, those numbers are greater and not consistent with what's on the page prior. Can you tell me what the difference is?
I can. I saw that too, Kathleen, and that's something I was going to ask our data analyst. It's all the way they take our calls for service and plug it into this report. We've found errors before that then it's the way that they run their report, and then they realize that there's a little bit of discrepancy. But I did see that this morning looking at this too, is that it was 103 on this page, but then 109 on the next page. So I will check with our data analyst to see, and I'll report back next time we meet.
Okay, I wanted to make sure I wasn't crazy,
Nope.
at least about this.
No, you're spot on. I saw that too.
Can I just add something real quick too there? October of 2020 is when those standards changed. They went from from uniform crime reporting into incident-based reporting. So that's why I think when you look at 18, 19, those numbers look significantly lower, but then those reporting standards changed significantly when we went to incident-based reporting.
I provided everybody with this document. I didn't want to go through it line by line. I wanted to see if anybody had any questions. I want to highlight some of the areas, but any other questions about our agency summary for October?
I didn't have a question, but I had a comment. The adduction, because of the way that it pulls on the report, is there by any chance that you could put like a footer on something about the fact that the adduction number shows differently or includes that other group, just to ease people when they're glancing at it?
Cornell, I've asked that twice of our data analysts to put that disclaimer on there, and it's still not on the report. So yes, that is exactly what I want, because I even look at that, I'm like, that's very concerning. And I'm promised repeatedly that they're going to address this issue, and I'm still waiting for them to put the disclaimer and put some type of different category for those false imprisonment charges. So I will mention that again, and this might carry weight, saying that it came from the Public Safety Committee. So I might get them to actually respond to putting that disclaimer on this report. So I appreciate that. I will reach out to them again.
My Public Safety Committee freaked out at me.
There it is. There it is.
I'll see if that does it for me. I appreciate it. Any other questions on the agency summary?
No, but I thank you for having this data in this way is really great.
Good. All right, I will stop sharing this screen and I will pull up our complaint data, and I'll turn it over to Captain Kukuski. Bear with me as my technical skills are somewhat limited, so give me a minute to pull up that next screen. As I mentioned, my technology skills are limited, so let me still try to find it here.
It's okay. We can ask how the Hawaiian trip was. Anything else?
I was just going to
besides-
say, let's hear about it. How many Mai Tais did you have?
Yeah, that's what we want.
I'm a pretty light drinker, so that wasn't the issue. But the other interesting, I mean, just that somewhat touches on what we do is they're having all kinds of problems. It's the Micronesians right now have moved in from the island of Truk and other places that were already in desperate financial straits pre-COVID. And then they also have a lot of global warming flooding going on. So they are fleeing their island, coming to Hawaii, where they're on the bottom of the barrel, the most desperate and destitute of pretty much anyone. So they are the, go back to the Irish, right? I mean, there's a new wave. They're the horrible people, but they're having lots of trouble. And with their desperation, they're having running battles with the police. And these almost always involve not just firearms, but automatic weapons and things of that level, which in Hawaii is a bigger deal because guns are not well known on the islands. And I don't think the police, some of them wear body armor. It's not required. I think more and more are, but talking to the guys who've been around a while, there are a lot more officers getting ready to get their retirement and get out because they are getting really freaked out. It's bad enough dealing with, chronically mentally ill and tourists are annoying and all that. But when you get to this level of desperation with guns, it's a scary thing. So probably not what you wanted to hear, but it brought greater appreciation for our folks here and wanting to continue to support them.
And thank you, Bartlett, for covering up my lack of technology skills and being able to share my screen, but I do have it up now, and I will turn it over to Captain Kukuski, who will talk about our complaints in the last quarter.
All right, thank you. Pull up my screen here. So last quarter, and this is from October through December, we had 4 complaints that were investigated and closed out. So our trend, I don't know if you remember earlier in the year, we kind of started off with quite a high number of complaints, and it definitely peaked, I think, around the summertime, and knock on wood, it's been not quite so many the latter part of the year. So I'll just kind of walk through these like we have in the past. Let me know if you have any questions as we go. The first one here actually came in on September 16th. And this complaint stemmed from an underage drinking party that our officers responded to. And we later got a complaint from a parent who had a couple of concerns with this one. One of them was that she thought, and I'll just kind of give a little more context. When the officers responded to the underage drinking party, there were lots of kids who kind of locked themselves into a house and were not coming out. As they pulled up onto the street, they noticed kids fleeing on foot, running away, people leaving in vehicles. And this was originally called in as there's a large party going on here. There's cars parked all over the street. It was after midnight and quite unusual for the area. So the complaints were that the parent felt that the officers were quote unquote wildly inappropriate and were joking around while standing outside with the parents. They also thought that that was an overuse of police resources. At the time, I believe the entire shift was out there, and they did have a couple of other officers from the sheriff's department as well. I know there was a traffic stop as well from one of the vehicles that had fled without any headlights on through the neighborhood. So that car was pulled over. So there was a lot going on in a short period of time, so that there was quite a few officers there. So again, with the process, the assigned supervisor looked at a lot of body camera footage, interviewed officers, and made some determinations on that. They did determine that one officer did make a joke about that something to the effect that only lacrosse players are going to be punished because he's a coach at an opposing school. This was met with a lot of laughter from the parents out there. He obviously meant that as a joke, but look, it just looks bad. Definitely not professional. So that was something that we noticed on that one. So that one was certainly not appropriate. That officer, but prior to this complaint even being investigated, actually left to go to another agency. So that was kind of a moot point to address it with them. The other concern as far as the number of resources, again, when we got there were kids fleeing on foot and in vehicles. We have concerns about kids getting in cars and driving and leaving. Our goal is to, prevent people from leaving and kind of get the house surrounded, and then kind of go from there, try to knock on the door, try to get parents out there, probably check license plates of cars parked in the street. So that can take a lot of officers to accomplish that. So the supervisor didn't find that any of those tactics were intimidating. And I would kind of argue that if just looking at the body camera, it was pretty loose, and obviously they were joking around in it to the point that it was offensive to someone. So there wasn't anything found as far as the use of the resources on that one. The second issue that was raised was found to be a little bit of a concern. The parent felt like they were lied to by a supervisor when they were told, or that the kids were told if they just came outside, they wouldn't get in trouble. So we didn't find any evidence that there was intentionally false information provided. The officers didn't issue any citations to those who came out of the house. But what did happen was the school district was notified if we were able to identify a student, for example, from Middleton High School who was at this underage drinking party. We did share that information with the school, and that is common practice, something that we do to address any underage drinking as far as athletic consequences, or if you're involved in sports or activities, things like that. So in that sense, the officer didn't quite tell it like it was going to play out. So we did use that as a teaching moment for that supervisor. They were counseled, and we actually also use that as an opportunity to kind of re-educate our entire staff on when we notify the school after incidents and how that process works. So we close that as a finding of unintentional error because it wasn't an intentional thing. It was literally probably more of the supervisor just wasn't really familiar with that notification process. So we fixed that up afterwards. So any questions on that?
I have this might be a semantics question, but relating to that athletics policy, is that a policy or is that at discretion or is that a handshake agreement for notifying the high school? I mean, does it always happen policy?
I don't think it's in writing, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chief, on that, but it's just something we've always done as long as I've been here. We have a really good relationship with our school district.
Yeah.
It's, typically if there's a significant incident outside of school, even if it's not having to do with consequences, even if there's a domestic incident at a student's house,
Yeah.
we will often let the SRO know, just so you know, a student's father was arrested for domestic violence. They may really need some support at school. So the SRO then will work with like a social worker and maybe go meet with them Monday morning and say, you might want to go meet with Bobby. He had a really tough weekend. So that there's a lot of different motivations with it. So,
Right.
but I don't know that it's necessarily in writing, but it is a state law that we can share that type of information with the school district. And as far as giving them reports unredacted and things like that.
The school has been requesting reports from us for decades, and it goes back to what Travis says. We have a really good relationship with them, and they have an athletic code that all these students, I think they sign, a piece of paper, or at least they get it in the handbook that they get every year. So reports like this are shared with the school district, and they have been shared with them for a number of years.
Yeah. I thank you for the clarification. I think it's a great thing to know what students are dealing with outside of school that otherwise the school might not know about. So thank you for clarifying.
You bet.
Can I ask one question?
Go
So
ahead, Kathleen.
I think I just read citations were not given to anyone in this case. So,
Correct.
yeah, citations were not issued. Is that normal for something like this?
Mm.
I mean, given what you just said about what it was and that it was a underage party, is that?
I would say no. This is a unique situation. And one thing we give our officers a lot of discretion as far as when to issue citations, but generally underage drinking citations are issued in circumstances like this. In this particular case, they felt like they had what we understand were dozens of students locked in this house refusing to come out. So the few that actually did cooperate and come out, they did elect to not issue them citations, but you also then have school consequences that they're dealing with. So although they weren't given a citation, they are having some consequences from an athletic side of things. Some of them may have been suspended from sports or activities. So to answer your question, it's not typically this is not how it goes, but this is kind of a unique one where we have a house full of kids and only a few are cooperating, and they were warned.
I have to be honest, out of full disclosure, that the other half of my house works at the high school. So what you've been talking about, I'm asking from the public safety perspective, not the other side of my house perspective. Two different things.
I'm just going to throw out there, having worked in government and uncomfortable situations often, I have probably tried to make a joke when things were tense, and now I'm going to second guess myself from now on, because someone might get offended and it might seem nice in the minute to make people laugh, but at midnight we make sad choices sometimes. So I'm glad that you guys are taking the approach of like training reminders on the school side, because sometimes we just don't know all those other interagency stuff. And I'm really glad that you're thinking through that and bringing it forward. Also, I will continue to watch my own words and be better.
Was this complaint returned or not returned?
Not returned. So actually, none of these 4 were returned.
And Travis, can I just hop in here? One of the other concerns, or one of the things that happened in this case, is that we have not had an underage drinking party like this in a number of years. A lot of that is related to COVID. So a lot of our officers who are on the scene, even the supervisor, they have not encountered an underage drinking party to this extent, if at all, in their career. So there was a lot of things like Travis mentioned going on. They thought they were doing the right thing with the kids that had left. I'm sure the officer thought that they, the very uncomfortable situation for the parents making the comment was to kind of, break the ice a little bit and make everybody more comfortable. But obviously one of the parents found that offensive. So a lot of teaching moments out of this incident. And I know Travis spent a lot of time speaking with the supervisor, and the supervisor in turn speaking with the staff about how to handle these in the future. And again, like Emily mentioned, watching what you say, because it could be offensive to one person.
And we deal with a lot of these complaints, but this one, it's like the flip side of what we normally deal with. It's like, you totally see it. Some parent freaked out. My kid's future is going to be ruined because they're going to get disqualified from football or lacrosse, and there goes their scholar. I don't know. I just don't even know. I just want to point that out, that this is
There was a lot of that going on, Bartlett. That was a very sensitive issue for some of these parents. So.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. All right, the next one came in on the 29th of September, a procedure issue. This actually started with our records department, which is a little bit unusual. We don't get a lot of complaints filed against our records staff. But this had to do with a couple who had a child adoption pending. And they got a little bit upset after they perceived that one of our records clerks wasn't promptly fixing an error that might have affected their adoption eligibility. So basically what happened was one of the individuals who was trying to adopt was in our record system under their name. There was someone else with an identical name also in the records system. And somehow back in 2016, those two names were merged in error. And as a result, there were some police contacts that were included in what we sent to this adoption agency as like a background check. So upon learning of that, the records clerk did contact the adoption agency, but what the two complainants wanted, they wanted a new fax sent with the updated records. But our records clerk didn't want to just send a new fax and get them all confused. They wanted to make phone contact and actually talk to a human being and explain what's going on. So that kind of led to this person being a little bit upset, and the perception that there wasn't prompt action being taken to address it. So looking into it, it was something that the records clerk was trying to correct, just in a little bit different way, and how they thought would be make more sense. And then we ended up getting the correct record sent over, and to the satisfaction of the complainant after just a couple of days. So this was closed as unfounded. Again, no evidence of any malicious refusal to supply that agency with the updated record. So any questions on that one? See, we have a visitor.
I am a little curious about when it says days later, does that mean days after the complaint was filed in
Yes.
September this year? Or days
Yes.
after the initial concern in 2016?
Both. Jeremy, do you remember how many? It was just a couple of days, wasn't it?
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, it was handled. This was all closed out within a couple of days from the date of the complaint. And like I said, it's in our old archived record system, so we can't figure out how exactly those two records were merged or why they were. I mean, I guess we know why, because they were the same name, but it was different date of birth. So it was an unintentional error on that end, but the information shared was accurate to what our records clerk knew. And then it was fixed by the following day after the complaint was filed.
Any other questions? Okay. The other one, and the reason these are a little bit out of order, they're put in here in the order that they were closed out. So these complaints are supposed to be closed out within a month. So as they're closed out, that's when they're put here on the spreadsheet. So we're back to 9/11 when this one was filed. This had to do with the disturbance call, and the complaint is regarding use of force. And just the call that we were dispatched to was a gentleman doing some landscaping outside of a apartment building, and he was witnessed to be defecating outside on the property while doing that work. And when confronted about it, he got into an altercation, a verbal altercation with the resident, and threatened that person. And then they went inside and called us. And when the officer got there, this person was uncooperative, refused to provide his name and date of birth after many requests, and then eventually just walked away from the officer and tried to leave, and was ultimately, he was put in handcuffs and issued a couple of citations. So he later alleged that the officers used excessive force on him. So the supervisor reviewed the body camera footage, which sort of speaks for itself. The officer who got there initially was very calm, very polite, professional, tried to find out what happened, and this person was very defensive and refused to identify themselves. And like I said, ultimately just started walking away from the officers. And at that point, they had probable cause to arrest him for disorderly conduct for both, defecating outside and then getting into a disturbance and threatening a resident. At that point, you're not free to just leave and walk away. So they did take hold of each of his arms and put his hands behind his back and put him in handcuffs. That was the only quote unquote force that was used. The officers reported that as soon as they kind of took hold of his arms and tried to get them behind his back, he, used force in the opposite direction, trying to get or keep his arms away from the officers. So that was the only force that was used. This was also reviewed by our critical incident review board, and they didn't feel that any of that was excessive and was within policy. So no excessive force was found there. Had the person just given his name and maybe explained what happened, he probably would have got a citation and been on his way. So he kind of stepped things up there in that regard. The second issue with that is he believed the officer was overly aggressive. Again, there was no evidence to support that. If anything, the officer could have been, press the issue more. She was extremely polite, calm, and tried to reason with this individual for, I think it was over 10 minutes before he just walked away. So again, no evidence there of any over aggression. And he also felt that he was treated differently because the officers knew the complainant, but there was no evidence that they did know this person prior. They had no prior contacts. And while there, actually a second resident came out and also complained about this landscaper's behavior. So that complaint was determined to be unfounded. Any questions?
I have one question. This might just be my grammar. If you scroll up a little bit more on that one, how come that one force was put in quotes? Yeah, only.
Because one could argue that that wasn't even a use of force. He was not used or not put in any type of a compliance hold. It's usually our trigger for use of force, which Jeremy can probably get into next in that use of force discussion. So it didn't even rise to the level of us triggering a use of force review. So it was his perception that force was used, but it's a little bit semantics. But
oh yeah, no, and what you're saying makes complete sense, because I remember in the last meeting there is a definition for use of force, and that what I was thinking that quotes might have meant, and I just wanted a clarification of that.
Sure, good question. All right, this last one kind of a long one. There were numerous issues that the individual had with this case. So I'll give you some background. Throughout the month of October, we were dealing pretty consistently with a teenage female here in Middleton who had a problem with stealing. She would often steal small items from stores in town, just out of primarily due to a situation she has called kleptomania. If you've never heard of that, essentially it's an impulse to steal. It's something that's not really controllable. These are, like I said, very small items, like often candy or just things she didn't need, which understandably led her mom to get pretty frustrated with these things. And she wanted her daughter to have consequences. So this resulted in a lot of police calls to her residence. She wanted her daughter arrested, wanted her daughter issued citations for retail theft and trespassing. So over the course of several different calls for service, she had a couple of issues. In one particular case, the officers agreed that her going home into what had become a pretty toxic environment that particular day would not have been good. So they actually arranged to take her to Briar Patch, just kind of get some respite for, I don't know if it was just for the night or for a few days. So they went back to the residence to pick up her medication. And while doing that, this teenager walked into her house and the officers followed her inside, just right into the doorway to get the medication, and then they left. But this parent had an issue with that and later complained that the officers entered her house without consent. While that may have been factually true, they're simply following this girl into the house. They're technically in her custody, so they can't just let this, if they would have just let the girl go into the house by herself, her and her mom might have gotten into some more heated discussions. So they did go into the house. It was very brief. The mom never asked them to leave, and then they left. So nothing really was found to be of issue with that situation as far as entering the house. Had she asked them to leave, they probably would have left, but they would have had to take the girl outside with them. The other issue was she had a issue with them not taking any action, even though that there was a retail theft and evidence to support it. But the issue we ran into was these stores, once they found out what her situation was and her condition, they weren't interested in pressing charges. So at that point, we don't have a victim, so we can't issue citations. So that got the mom pretty frustrated, but our hands were kind of tied. She also felt, and this may have been just in her own, maybe contacting the store by phone or maybe stopping by. Her impression was that they wanted the teenager charged with theft, but we always talk to managers because they're kind of more people of authority, and the managers that we spoke with were not interested in having any charges filed in these retail thefts. So we didn't. Number 4 there, she had an issue with a delayed response in one case. She thought that led to a sort of a cascade of events that led to more problems and more stealing. But at the time the parent called, there were no officers available to respond. So there was a delay, and according to the sergeant who looked into this, they actually did call her on the phone within about 10 minutes and said, "We're all tied up right now. We'll be there as soon as we can. There's going to be a delay." So she did know that, and they responded as soon as they could. Number 5, she didn't like something one of the officers said. She alleged that they made a statement that there's no need to be afraid of her daughter. But in reviewing the body camera, what the officers were talking with her about was in context of her slamming a door and yelling about doing homework. So the officer did say something to the effect that didn't rise to the level of a disorderly conduct charge, or that didn't rise to the level of making her feel unsafe. There was a lot going on. So I think this parent was sort of combining different incidents and felt like the officers were downplaying the totality of the circumstances. But as far as when that particular statement was made, it was only regarding, again, slamming of a door and a teenager yelling about doing homework. So the officer did make that statement. And then lastly, she had an issue with her daughter not being issued a citation for trespassing when she went into a Middleton store after being banned. But upon following up with that, the officers found out that she actually was not on the banned list. If you weren't aware of it, a lot of stores actually have a list of people that are not allowed in the store. And once they're told you are not to be here, then they're put on that list. So there was no record of her ever being told that. So again, we really don't have grounds to issue her a citation. So we didn't. This is a really kind of a sad situation where this girl clearly needs help. The mom is kind of at her wit's end and wants her daughter charged with crimes, unfortunately. So we're continuing to work on this one. We have, like I said, she stayed at Briar Patch on numerous occasions for extended periods of time to sort of get her some respite from the daughter. We're looking at county services, looking at the district attorney, kind of looking at these cases and kind of telling the mother, like, look, we're not going to charge your daughter with theft if she has a diagnosed condition where she can't control her stealing. So this has been quite a bit of work for our officers over the last month, and hopefully things start to quiet down. But ultimately, this one was closed as unfounded. There just wasn't any evidence that the officers did anything improper, even though there were numerous complaints made here. So any questions at all about any of those or any of the other complaints?
All right, thanks Travis for going over the last quarter complaints. I will stop this share and quickly talk about the use of force review that we'll bring forward. Captain Geisler will talk about our use of forces within the last quarter. This is the first time that we're bringing it forth to this committee. It's been a goal of mine for probably the last year and a half to have an outside group take a look at our use of force and our complaints. As with our complaints, we're looking for some feedback, and we can make changes as we go. The use of force, there's a lot more of those. So Captain Geisler is going to cover kind of the top ones, highlights, but feel free to ask any questions about any of them that you see on your screen. So with that, I will try to pull up use of force data. And Captain Geisler, I will turn it over to you.
All right. So I apologize for my lighting, but I realized after this started that there's a bulb missing up there. So I have this weird shadow thing, but just so kind of a review. I know we talked very basically about this stuff a while back now, but as you go from left to right here, so column A is the number of the document. So we have all of these forms. We call it the critical incident review form. Every officer who is involved in a use of force, a pursuit, an incident where a vehicle fails to stop for them for whatever reason, an accident, and which one am I missing now? That's it, I guess. Yeah, the pursuit, use of force, and accidents. So every one of those gets a form. As you guys know, with all these stolen vehicles, we have a lot of vehicles that fail to yield to us. So when you see that number, our use of force statistics are not that high, where we're into the 80 some incidents. So this includes everything. You'll see the numbers don't necessarily correspond numerically perfect either. So from left to right, so that's the number of the document. Every officer who's involved in a use of force has to fill out an additional critical incident review form. That form goes to their immediate supervisor for review, and that review usually involves an interview of the officers, a review of a report if necessary, and review of body and squad cameras. Once that's completed, that comes to me, and I do the same thing, and I review it. So we have this two-stage, two-tiered system, and if it meets certain policy thresholds, like there was an injury to an officer or an injury to a suspect, then we have a critical incident review board. That's what it says over in column M there, the CIRB. That's a critical incident review board where we pull in members of our police department outside of those who have already reviewed the incident. Usually if it's a use of force situation, we'll have a defensive and arrest tactics instructor, or if it's a deadly force situation, it would be a firearms instructor that goes over and does all of that same stuff that the prior two checks have already done to see. And the goal is to determine whether it was within policy and whether training and equipment are adequate. So from left to right, he shrunk it down there a little bit. Column B is just that it's been reviewed and it's now closed. We have our case number, the date of the incident, and just for a little bit of clarification, so this is all of third quarter up to basically the end of November, if any of these forms had been turned into me. So it does go a little bit beyond just the third quarter here. The category and all of these are going to be use of force. You see that one on the top is a failure to stop case 2 that resulted in a use of force, and we can go over that in a second here. And we have any subcategory that you'll see it a little bit lower down is taser was pointed, but then I document that it was not fired. There he's got it highlighted. Sex and race of the subject or subjects who were involved, the address of where they live, and then the nature of the initial call that the officers were dispatched to. So kind of a basic summary of the information they had responding to that call. And then column L is the justification for the use of force. And then, like I said, M is the whether or not there was a critical incident review board. And there's not too many of those. And then there's actually 1 or 2 more columns over there. And that's just if there is a critical incident review board, what the disposition was it within policy? Was it not within policy? And then if there's any referrals, as the most common referral is, hey, why don't you can see that recommended review with supervisor. So just there's some learning topics here, kind of like Travis had talked about. Sit down with your supervisor, review this, and just see how areas where we can improve. So you'll also see that some are highlighted there. So Chief, if you can go over, it's all the way to the left there. So the top three there in columns 26, 27, 28, in row 26, 27, 8, those are all one incident. That means there are 3 officers involved in that, and it's broken down by each officer what they did. So you can see two officers pointed a handgun, 1 pointed a taser, but it wasn't fired there. And that was at 1 subject. So there's 1 male white subject that was involved in there. If there's more than 1, you'll see that, in fact, if you scroll all the way up to the top, that very first one, there were 2 people in the vehicle there, I believe. There you go. So there was a male white and a female Hispanic that was in that vehicle. So like I said, well, one more thing. So Travis talked about like that threshold for when a use of force report, critical incident report is required. That's at what we call a compliance holder above. So they used to call it the force option continuum when the 3 of us probably started in law enforcement. It's now called intervention options. The idea being that a continuum would kind of imply you start here and you work your way up, and it would be something that's called an escort hold all the way up to deadly force. Now, of course, there's situations where it's not logical for you to start at an escort hold and then work your way up to deadly force. So they changed it. It's intervention options. You have multiple options. So that first one, you'll see some are documented like in row 12, an escort. So an escort is basically we grab your arm, one hand on a wrist, 1 on an elbow, and we try to guide you to where, hey, you need to come with me. Frequently used in, say, bar disturbances. You're saying, hey, you need to come with me. Why don't we go talk outside, kind of thing. And then the next step is a compliance hold, which would be pain compliance, where the most common one is a compliance hold on a wrist, where you bend a wrist and give them a little pain to kind of get them to come along. Otherwise, there's also pressure points, things like that. You'll see decentralized pretty frequently. Decentralized is the state's definition of essentially you lost your center, which means you've gone down to the ground. So there's numerous different ways to do that. And then it goes up to strikes, it could be knees, kicks, punches. And then we have our tasers and our baton, and we have less lethal shotguns, and all the way up to deadly force is where it stops there. So basically what I was going to do is just kind of go over a couple of them. You guys can stop me, ask any questions at any time if you'd like. Just before I do that, so we do quarterly reviews as well of all uses of force, just to kind of put things into perspective. So in the third quarter, our officers responded to 5,065 calls for service, and we had 15 separate incidents where force was used. That's 0.29% of the incidents that they responded to. First quarter was 0.28, second quarter was 0.30, so we're right at about the 0.29 average for the year. So about 0.29% of all calls for service that we were responding to, we will use some level of force. So
yeah, thanks. I can't see all of them, but when you're scrolling down, there was a critical incident review board, and it looked like it's the same incident we looked at earlier. The guy with defecating on the lawn with the
Yep, he's definitely
on
here.
Walk me through that. Where was that? It's like is it 35? No,
31 it looks like.
31, yeah.
And so this is what Travis was saying earlier, is that basically what they did was use an escort position and then brought his hands behind his back, and he resisted. They never applied any compliance, so standard would not indicate that that is even considered a use of force as far as our policy goes. I mean, we do that very frequently when people are placed in handcuffs. So he did one additional, or some, I guess, additional details in there, like it says. So he walked away after picking up his hedge trimmer. I mean, this is it was either a gas, I think it was electric gas, or I'm sorry, electric gas. Well, no, that's not a thing. It was an electric hedge trimmer that he tried to walk away with after the officer told him not to. So she grabbed him by the arm, and he immediately resisted. So one of the, oh, go ahead.
What I'm wondering about though is, I mean, all that I get, but why does this one go through the review board and was recommended a review with the supervisor when there are others with guns and people's heads are banged or whatever that aren't taken to that point?
Yeah, and that's a good question. It falls back on our policy. So if there's a complaint filed alleging excessive force, by policy, we're required to review that incident.
Got it.
Yeah, so that would be, and he didn't really claim an injury, but he said his shoulder had hurt. So we just kind of, this is where it was kind of on borderline whether we should by policy review it or not, based on his complaint of an injury. Now the complaint against the officer of excessive force required it anyway, but so just an abundance of caution, we did review it.
But then in the disposition, you've got recommended review with supervisor. So
Yep.
What is that? I mean,
that's
through the whole thing.
Yeah, basically, and a lot of times in this case, before we even reviewed it by the review board, our supervisor had done that. Proactive supervisors are going to review this stuff, and right after they review it, they're going to talk to the officer and say, what could we have improved here? So she's literally one of our newest officers. She was hired this year, and there was some learning. There were some definite learning points here. And a lot of times she was I don't want to say she was being too nice, but newer officers rarely escalate force quickly. Sometimes you become more problematic by not escalating that level of force, and letting it go too long. The difference was she was by herself for a while when this was all going down, because there were officers that were actually on a pulseless or report of a pulseless non-breather at the time. So an officer had stopped by to assist her, and she said, "No, I'm good. You go on that call." And then he ended up coming back right around the time that this guy was being taken into custody. So there's learning points there about, hey, if your partner's there and this guy's not being super cooperative, maybe you stay you need to be more assertive and take control of the situation. We never tell our officers not to be so nice, but in different terms, it's you need to take control of the situation.
Okay.
So that top one, and when I say there were 15 incidents, that involved 50 applications of force. Now, when you see that first one, there were 3 officers involved. One pointed a handgun, all 3 pointed a handgun. So that's 3 applications of force in one incident against 2 people. Okay. So that one it ended up being a drunk driving stop, but the vehicle stopped, and then it pulled away, and then it stopped again. and then it pulled away and pulled into a parking lot, or actually, no, I apologize. Another officer kind of came in and cut him off, and then they did a high risk stop. So the state trains that, this is one of those situations where we have no idea what's going on. Is this vehicle stolen? What's the situation? So they ended up pulling out their handguns and taking the subject into custody and what we call a high risk stop, saying, we don't know what's going on here. We're going to bring them back to us and we're going to take them out at gunpoint. Now, it turned out that the driver was just very intoxicated, not armed or anything like that, but the officers are kind of going to the point where we don't know what's going on. And so we got to escalate to a high level here. And so we know that we're safe. 87 was another one. So this one is kind of very minimal use of force as far as that goes. There's no injuries or anything here, but this subject was called in as a possible drunk driver. We get those very frequently. The officer actually was able to locate the vehicle, started the operating standardized field sobriety testing, the process for arresting somebody for drunk driving. When told he was under arrest, started clenching his fists and holding his arms against his body. I know that most of you guys went through that training that Lieutenant Lather put on. One of those things we were going to have you go through when we can go hands-on is to show you how difficult it actually is to get somebody's hands behind their body when they don't want you to. So the two officers here actually just held on for about, like I documented, 2.5 minutes. They just waited. They called backup and tried not to escalate. They tried to de-escalate. And eventually the third officer got there and the subject was still resisting. So they're decentralized, which means, again, they were taken down to the ground and taken into custody there. So that there had 3 officers, and that's considered 5 uses of force, 2 escorts and 3 assisted with that decentralization there on the one subject. 111 was another one that actually involved this subject with a knife. And we talked about some of those ongoing problems. This is a subject that we've actually been to numerous calls for. The subject has some alcohol issues. You can see at the time of this incident, he was a 0.361 blood alcohol or breath alcohol concentration. Put that in perspective, the legal limit is a 0.08. So we're talking over 4 times the legal limit, well, 4.5 times the legal limit, and was involved in a disturbance he lives with his parents. This is an adult subject who's living with his parents and gets into some issues when drinking. So held a knife to his chest while they were trying to get away. So the officers showed up, saw him in his kitchen with a knife. So our officer came around and pointed a taser, which is of course a less lethal weapon. Was not fired. The subject dropped the knife and was taken into custody without incident. So we do run into those. We're not having the same level of violent crimes or anything, but we do run into armed people as well. 130 was another one. This one was another one that was reviewed by our critical incident review board because an officer was injured. So this was a report of a domestic disturbance, or a disturbance initially called at an apartment complex. And the subject was, they believe, had been drinking and probably using drugs as well. They established probable cause, and I apologize for all these abbreviations. So that says officers developed probable cause to arrest for domestic disorderly conduct, tried to take the subject into custody. He did initially comply, put his hands behind his back, and as soon as the officer grabbed his hands, he tried to take off running. Luckily, we had 2 officers there immediately. But when he was taken down to the ground, he ended up bringing his head back and striking our officer in the lip, caused a soft tissue injury. It wasn't a significant injury. But then the subject started banging his head against the sidewalk on his own. We ended up using what we call a red man helmet, which is just a padded helmet on him. He also tried banging his head on the squad window once we eventually got him there. So when it says 95, that means he was taken into custody for disorderly conduct. RO is resisting, obstructing an officer, and also battery to a police officer, which is what PO stands for. So every once in a while, again, it results in officer injuries as well. That one was reviewed and there was no recommendations on that one. And then I was just going to go over that very last one. We talked about, we have a mental health hospital in the city here. And again, I think what's frequently highlighted in the media anyway is how officers are kind of rushing in and making mistakes, which I'm not going to say that doesn't happen, of course. I think this is a good example of how our supervisors get on scene and the importance of having supervisors on scene, and they're slowing things down. This one happened to come in, it was about 10:45 p.m. So somebody who had been transported to that hospital, not by our officers, it was by a third party, started throwing furniture, damaged some property, put a hole in drywall, and then he started threatening staff. So they contacted us. So our officers got there. The convenient part of this is our shift changes at 11 p.m. So the supervisor on scene said he was locked in a secure area of this mental health hospital. The supervisor on scene said, look, we're not going in yet. Let's just establish a dialogue with him. We're going to wait for additional officers to show up. So they ended up having third shift come out and assist them. So there ended up being, I want to say 6 officers here ready to assist. Not all of them were obviously involved. Only one ended up applying a compliance hold. But the subject resisted immediately when they tried to detain him in handcuffs. So he ended up getting the compliance hold applied, and he ended up transported to a local hospital for a mental health evaluation. And they were going to refer charges. That just means he's not arrested and taken to jail. They send up charges, a recommendation to the Dane County District Attorney's Office, and they review the case and determine whether or not they want to pursue charges against them. A lot of times in situations where mental health is involved, like Travis had talked about, with one of those complaints, they're not gonna file criminal charges in those circumstances. So that's kind of an overview, but I'm certainly willing to entertain any questions you guys have.
I just can't see. Can you either shrink it or go to the right? There are the ones that did go to critical incident review board. I just can't see the outcome. Thank you. Oh, they're just without. Okay.
Yep. The most common referral is a review with the supervisor. And again, the purpose of the critical incident review board is to determine whether there are any policy violations specific or whether there's any training or equipment needs. So a lot of times there's not a policy violation, but they might determine that, like we talked about that prior one, that, hey, this officer could just be, I guess you can go over it and just, there's some teaching points, there's some learning points, and just review the incident to see how it can be improved in the future.
Any other questions for Captain Geisler or for me regarding the use of force? I think one of the things I want to point out is if you look at the subject's address, you'll see that I think a lot of times people think that we only deal with Middleton residents. As you can see, that is not the case. The last one that Jeremy highlighted was somebody from La Crosse, people from Stoughton, from Fitchburg. So I think sometimes folks feel like Middleton police, we only deal with folks that are in the city of Middleton, and that's not the case. They travel into our city, they commit crimes, they'll get into disturbances at our local bars, they'll commit retail theft. So I think sometimes there's that feeling again that we only deal with Middleton residents, and that's not the case, as this spreadsheet kind of highlights. Any other questions, comments, feedback on this review, things that you want to see different in the future?
Feel like a broken record, but I think saying thank you again for this level of transparency and talking through all of this information with us. I know when you're short-staffed, still pulling all this together and taking the time is great. Bartlett, were you going to say something?
One thing that I know you've got them by numbers, but it sounds crazy. If there's a way to I guess you do it with, never mind, I just don't see it. You've got the shaded distinguishing cases. Oh, I get it. Sorry, I understand now.
No, and I have to give credit to Jeremy and Travis for putting these spreadsheets together. It's a lot of work. As Rebecca, you just mentioned, they have a lot of other assignments and duties on their plate. But again, as a year and a half ago, when I brought to this committee this goal of bringing our use of force and complaints to this committee for review. It's kudos to both of them for putting all this together and going through all of our data and all the complaint forms and use of force forms and giving a quick summary for everybody to get kind of that snapshot of each incident.
So next up, decision on welfare check.
Tom and I spoke on Tuesday after the agenda was put out, because I know this is something that Tom has brought up a few times, some questions he has about check welfare cases. They're not even called check welfare cases anymore with the change to our new records management system. It's actually called check person. And if you saw in our agency summary from October, we had 48 of those calls within 1 month. So you can imagine how many we have in a given year. I think I've answered all of Tom's questions. I think Tom was wondering if there's specific guidelines that we have for checking somebody's welfare, if their employer calls on them, if a family member calls on them. And as much as I'd like to say that we have specific guidelines, every single case is so different. Whether there's mail stacked up outside the door, the newspaper, or family members are telling us that this is really rare, that they haven't heard from a family member in 2 or 3 days. Or we hear from family members saying this is the 5th time in the last 3 weeks that this person has stopped responding to text messages and have kind of just gone off the radar. As I mentioned before, there's no crime with stopping contact with family, and even there's no crime in taking your own life. So those are really difficult calls for us, and we do the best we can going in and checking the welfare. And we also got to be mindful of the Constitution. We can't just barge into somebody's home without a warrant, without consent, without exigent circumstances, or even under the community caretaker guidelines. But I think I've answered Tom's questions, but I thought we'd still discuss it quick to see if there's any other committee members that had questions about these calls. But without going through every single 48 calls in October, it's really difficult to answer specific questions about cases unless we pull that specific case out and go through it and ask questions about why we went into a residence or why we didn't. But I think I've answered Tom's questions. But Tom, if you're still on here and
Yeah.
you want to add any more, feel free to do so.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you mentioned that what I asked for would be extremely time consuming, which I didn't think. I wasn't aware that it would. I thought that the data we had could produce a report that would maybe classify some of those 48 monthly welfare checks, and also show the response time to those welfare checks and how quickly they were resolved. I mean, sometimes they might be, a welfare check might be somebody died, missing. So it could be, a person who is missing too. But so I thought some kind of classification would be very helpful. I guess what started this was a few meetings ago, which would be a case that would have been a year ago. We were reviewing a complaint on such a welfare check.
Right.
And that complaint, I agreed that the police did the right thing, but I thought it would be helpful to have more data and some kind of classification about how many there are, how they're resolved, and how they're classified. I guess that would require, going through all 48, having somebody, and I'm not allowed to go through those 48. So that would be it wouldn't be worth, a person's time to try to get that information manually, I guess. So I understand that, but I still, if we had a computer system that would provide us a little bit more details about them, that would be nice. And maybe someday we'll be choosing a different system that would allow us more, more information to classify these things. And it seems like, just in this meeting alone, we were talking about some of the misunderstanding about some of the data we're getting due to, the fact that we switched from an event-based reporting system to from a violation-based system. And I guess the other question I would have related to this is it's standardized, right? Is the reporting system itself standardized, or just the data that we're required to gather standardized?
The report that I share with the committee, Tom.
Yeah,
So we share a data, well, our records management system is part of the EMPAS group. So Fitchburg, Sun Prairie, Middleton, Verona, and Monona, we all share a records management system. This started in early 2000s, and it's kind of evolved into a few other initiatives, including the hiring of a IT person and also a data analyst, so that we have one data analyst that works for all 5 agencies. And because you can imagine that's a lot of work, they create one report for all 5 of us. And
Yeah.
they try not to break it down specific to, hey, Middleton wants this and Prairie wants that, because they just don't have the time to do it. So we get a generic report that they create for all 5 of us that we have access to. We can make little modifications. I can reach out to them and say, I need this data, but I want to be mindful of one data analyst for 5 pretty large agencies with a lot of officers and a lot of data that's coming towards them. So that's our data analyst. And so there are mistakes like what Kathleen pointed out when I saw today too. And we try to correct them when it comes to my attention. But again, I gotta be mindful that he's also responsible for 4 other agencies, 2 of them which have higher crime rates and bigger populations than us. And he gets called for their services a lot more than we need him for. But so it is a standard report that we get for all 5 agencies. So any other questions on check person, check welfare calls? Again, each individual case is so different. We had one 2 days ago that was called in for check welfare. Individual failed to return home. We started tracking phones, we started tracking vehicles. It's pretty interesting that even though we think that we might not be on the grid, we are always on the grid. It's kind of scary how we can be tracked nowadays. That case was assigned to a detective, even though there was some concerns. There was also some information that we had that this individual had gone off the grid previously, had suffered some depression. And in this case, we tracked the car, tracked the vehicle, and within, I think, about 24 hours, we had tracked down the individual in Dane County. So each case is so different based on the information that we have, but we do follow up on these, and we always err on the side of checking somebody's welfare. And again, if we have specific information that this is really odd behavior for them, that we go into the residence and under that community caretaker and exigent circumstances exception and check someone's welfare to make sure that they're okay. But I just wanted to leave it on the agenda to see if anybody else had any other questions besides what Tom has asked the last couple of meetings, to see if I can answer any of those questions. All right, I will share my screen with the agenda.
Great. So future agenda items, do we have anything that we'd like to put on for future agenda?
I do. I've heard from a couple different officers, a couple different things about speeding, like formal and informal considerations about if you stop someone, when you stop them. There's the old story, unless you're going 5 miles over, no one's going to look at you. And if you're not going 10 miles over, they're not going to look. Just ranges like that. And with several incidents lately, one in particular, speed was a major factor. I'm just wondering, is that something we should discuss as a it's a policy, I guess. And like what, I understand there are different sides to it, but I think it's something I'd like to at least have a discussion about, and what that would mean if we were to encourage tightening up on that.
So Bartlett, bring our policy to the next meeting so everybody can take a look and give some feedback. Is that kind of what I'm hearing from you?
Yeah.
Okay.
I imagine there's some enforcement considerations with low staffing as well, but that is an assumption.
No, you're right. That's what we see is the officers, if they're going on more and more calls and they have less unallocated time, it's difficult for them to find time when they're not doing reports and trying to get a break. I have officers on day shift that sometimes struggle to get a lunch break. The last thing that they're probably going to do is do the proactive work, because they're trying to get caught up on reports and take care of the things that are absolutely needed. It goes back to the conversation I had at the beginning, is when we don't add staff, the more calls for service, the less unallocated time we have, and the proactive stuff is going to be the first thing that goes to the wayside.
I hear more support for our education on a referendum. So
Well,
noted.
we want to be careful. Hey, give us more tax money so we can hire officers to start doing
Dig it.
state checks.
I
all
know.
Okay, but I have to interject because I had the kids one day and one of your officers on patrol was at the Quick Trip in our district and we had stopped and the kids waved him down to say hi and he stopped his car. He was in the parking lot. He was pulling out. The kids were like, oh, you know, hello, Mr. Officer. And he didn't know who I was. He didn't know who they were. He was just like, hi. He could tell he stopped. He handed them stickers. He asked me first if he could give them stickers. And he did such a great job. And I don't know who it was, but I know they don't have time to be proactive, but that officer in that minute took a minute to say hi to some kids and did good stuff. So
Thank you, Emily.
nice feedback.
Those are great stories. I like to hear that. Thank you.
An agenda request we talked about after talking about the welfare thing was bicycles. There's a lot, it seems like there's a lot changing throughout the county on whether or not municipalities require bicycles to be registered or not, and how many are stolen, and then there was a complaint I noticed in one of those My Neighborhood online things regarding Madison's police department. The complaint was that they weren't helpful when somebody tried to report a stolen bicycle. That was actually advertised on, I think, eBay or something like that. But with all these changes taking place, it'd be nice to know what we're doing, you know, with bicycle registration. I know you can register a bike in Middleton because I just did. But could we have that on the agenda for the next meeting?
I just want to make sure we keep our committee responsibilities separate. There is a pedestrian bicycle and transit committee for specific bike related things, and the license and ordinance committee for registrations and things as well. So what, could you refine that a little bit more, what you'd want to talk about at the public safety committee level?
I would like to know how many bikes are registered. The police are responsible for that. I would like to know, well, I guess we have an ordinance that requires that you register your bike. I guess, is there a fine if you don't register your bike? And then when did we stop putting stickers on to show that a bike is registered? You know, what are we, it seems like, you know, it used to be when you bought a bike, they would tell you what you need to do, but most of the retail shops, including the one in Middleton, don't really know what the current situation is. And I don't think that, I think that's police related. I think it's probably a good outreach thing, you know, for the police to be in communications with the bike retailers in town. And I don't think that relates to the bike path at all.
Tom, I can tell you, in my years with Middleton, I can't recall any time that an officer has issued a citation for a bicycle not being registered, or for a bike not being registered. It's just not something that is a priority. And what we've found over time is that people just weren't interested in registering their bikes anymore. So that is why we stopped issuing the stickers. And there's a cost to purchasing those stickers. So again, we thought we could allocate those funds in a different way. So I think it's over time, it's just evolved. I think, as I mentioned on Tuesday, you and I, when we were growing up and got a bicycle, it was just common, you got it registered. That is not the case at all anymore, that people just don't register their bicycle. If it gets lost, or stolen. It's just not a concern of theirs. It's not a priority. But I can get you that data and see what I can find for our next meeting.
Should we be recommending our older people maybe change our ordinance that's no longer required? I don't know. That would be, I think, within the scope of the committee, wouldn't it? You know, if we have, you know, ordinances that aren't relative anymore, maybe they need to be.
I guess maybe, I know you mentioned some Madison issues that you read about it. Am I missing the boat here
Yeah.
on Middleton being an issue?
well, somebody reported a bike, they reported where it was for sale and where it was on eBay, and the police ignored it.
In
And
Madison?
I can say the same thing happened to me about 15 years ago in Middleton. But I guess, I don't know. I think it would be nice to have an awareness of what our expectations should be. And if we don't have, if nobody thinks they need to register their bike anymore, we should know that that's not necessary. And then we should let our aldermen know that maybe we need to change that ordinance.
And Tom, this is a good topic. And the one thing that I've been pondering in the pandemic is that, a little bit off subject, is we got a dog, and I'm an older woman. And it was about 3 or 4 months later, my mom turned to me and she goes, "Did you get your dog's, license, register, whatever it is?" I'm like, "Do you have to do that?" She's like, "I can't believe you don't know your licenses and ordinances. Emily, you need to read these," right? And so, with the pandemic and small children, I just haven't thought of it. Same thing with the bikes. My husband and I always registered ours when we lived in Madison, intended to do it from Middleton, but we had a newborn. Now the kids are cycling through bikes because they're growing, they're getting taller. We haven't done them all. We have some of them, I believe, but not all of them. So what I was thinking for the next Alder newsletter that I do for the community is to go over what some of those standard things are, because as parents and people new to the city, because my district gets a lot of people from the coast. We have a lot of coastal people moving in. They may not be aware of if you got a dog during the pandemic, if you got a bike to go bike the Conservancy. These are some things to make sure you can go and do. But again, if it's not mandatory, if it's more preferential, that might be something for council to consider down the road. But I think Rebecca's right that that's a different committee. But for me personally, I will take this as a takeaway, Tom. And I am your alder, so I will personally make sure I can dedicate it to you. Although people may not want to see that in the newsletter. Thanks, Tom, for making me go do my licensing. But we can say, hey, you know what? We can all do better. And we want to make sure you know about maybe top 3, doggies, bikes, and if anyone else has a recommendation that maybe I'm missing, you'll let me know offline. So.
I certainly don't mean to suggest that we need to go after people that don't register their dogs or bikes, but I do think people should know what the benefits of it is, or if there are any benefits to it, and what kind of response they can expect. And the other part of this is, you also have an inventory of abandoned bikes, and what's the policy on that? I don't think my condo understands that at all. And I think maybe we used to have outreach where a policeman would actually show up at a board meeting, but that hasn't happened in over a decade. But
probably
I think this is, I think we really don't know what's going on with bikes, whether it's important or not. Maybe it's not. Maybe people don't steal bikes anymore. I don't know.
Well, I think
go ahead.
Appreciate your concern, Tom, and I think we'll make sure this is recorded in the minutes. And I think with Emily taking it and doing some activity with the newsletter, and I know Jeremy's listening quietly with License and Ordinance Committee, hopefully we can get you funneled in the right direction to maybe get a little bit more feedback and engagement on your concern around bicycles.
And my other feeling is that the education shouldn't be at the district level. The engagement should be more towards the retail end of it, because that's where, in this particular case, the bike showed up at, on eBay. Maybe the bike shows up at Goodwill. Maybe we could find stolen bikes if we required retailers that sell used bikes to cross-check them.
Sure. Okay. Are there any other items for future agenda?
So I guess it's rejected then. My request is rejected, correct?
Well, no, I Tom, you raise a good point. It is, I mean, I dropped a bunch of things in the thing. I would like this to be on the next, just discuss what is the law and the police chief has to maintain a registration, which he does. It's an online form, but then is there any enforcement? It's out there, it's on the book. And we don't have to recommend or not recommend, but at least acknowledge it. So I think it's, but, and I'm about to, well, I'll just say it now. I had a joke. Probably shouldn't joke, but Tom, I think we can just solve our budget problem right now because fines are $50 to $3,500. So, you know, there are probably 10,000 bikes not registered in Middleton. Let's,
I was gonna say, I owe a lot of money then.
I was thinking the same as I was sitting there and being like the kids' bikes and my bikes. My husband has 5 bikes. Pretty sure they're not all registered. You'll be getting some from the Kuhn household. So
I just add too that my time in the Investigative Services Bureau or Detective Bureau that we do keep track of all thefts of bicycles. We find, or at least when I was back there a number of years ago, we recover twice as many bikes as are reported stolen. If you do register your bike, the odds are much higher that you'll be able to get it back. But that's the primary benefit. There's really, like the chief said, there's no benefit to us enforcing or writing a citation to somebody who doesn't do it. They're probably already a victim.
Yeah.
And also I have a lot of apartments in my district with a lot of free and reduced lunch kids. So I don't want to, and Tom, I'm not saying it's a bad idea, but what I'm saying is if we're taking away, like for the library, we no longer are charging people if they are late with their library books because of these kind of kids. We want to encourage them to read books. Same thing with biking. We want to encourage people to use their bikes. So it sounds like the Middleton police are trying to encourage people to use bikes, but maybe we just need some reminders out there, especially for the folks not from Middleton.
they can't register with us anyway.
I didn't even know that. I'm gonna get better, but I got the dog fixed. She's licensed, so.
Okay. All right, but I think I would back up Tom to at least have that discussion, and I think it's legit for us to say policy wise. I mean, it says right there what the point of the law is, and I think we just encourage Emily and our alders to report back saying, hey, either we have it or we don't, or you can make it voluntary, but let's at least get rid of the penalty or something, just to clarify. Madison repealed theirs, so we can have this discussion again in several months and hopefully come up with something that's an actual recommendation out.
How would this relate though to the pedestrian, bicycle and transit committee? I mean, I understand the police portion of it, but is this also something we should share with them?
Sure. We could alert them, but their focus is providing the sidewalks and the bike paths and trails, right?
Well, so their description is on and off street bicycle accommodations, transit operations, service changes, and the implementation of updates to City of Middleton bicycle and pedestrian plan.
Yeah.
So I feel like we would have some good cross-pollination with that as well.
I mean, they're the perfect group to get confirmation that, we can say, look, we're being asked to enforce something, or it's on the books. We feel bad we're not enforcing it. We don't, but I feel bad. I don't feel bad about not enforcing it. So is it a dead law? And then they can come in and say, we don't want this, or we want it to be voluntary or something, right? It's a good opportunity to clean up old laws. No one reads this stuff. You guys realize that, right?
Oh, I know.
You just read it.
Well, because it was pointed out, right? No one's going through and finding dead laws going, what's this in there for? So, yeah.
No, I do agree with you guys. So I think it's maybe just as simple as saying, is registering your bike optional? Oh, and if you have your bike registered, these are the benefits of it. One of the questions I had about the registration for the police department, because I was watching a documentary, if someone has like their bike registered, it shows up at the pawn shop, is it inside of a database of stolen objects that they can cross-reference, or is it like a flag or anything?
Like at a bicycle shop?
Or a bicycle shop or a pawn shop. I know Goodwill may not do it, but with a pawn shop, like check that registration to say this bike has been flagged as stolen.
Sometimes, but we are connected with our pawn shops, and we can flag certain items that we have a serial number for, we can actually put it in the system of the pawn shop. It's throughout the United States, and it'll actually alert us by email that the item has been pawned at a pawn shop at this location, and we can get the bike back or that stolen item back by contacting that store. So yes, there is a way to do it, but it's on the pawn shop to enter that data into the database. In some places, some pawn shops don't always do that, but there is a way to track that.
As one of the nice benefits to get people to maybe register their bike. Hey, you might get it back.
Exactly. I move to adjourn.
I second.
Can I ask one more thing? I'm sorry. I don't mean to kind of delay things. I'm just wondering at the next meeting, if I know twice tonight we talked about the new Miramount behavioral health. It's essentially a hospital in town, and it will be open about 6 months when we meet next. I'd be sort of curious, Chief, you mentioned some sort of work you're doing to perhaps establish a relationship between the police department. What's happening with it, and how that's benefiting or aiding in what's happening with the work of the department. I think 6 months and you might have some impression of that. I mean, I think it was new maybe at our last meeting. So after 6 months, maybe you have something. We don't have to talk about it right now. It's just a curiosity.
Yeah, that's a great point, Kathleen. And yes, we have something, and we're working with Miramont. There's obviously been some bumps in the road as they're learning their procedures, have new staff on board, and we're really working with them. So I think that's a great topic to bring up, and we can kind of do an overview of the calls for service that we've had there and how things are going. That's a great topic. I'll put it on the list.
Great. Thank you. And now I'm done.
I got something, though. I'd like to ask about the next meeting and when it'll be and what the best time is for everybody. I think it would have been really helpful for me a year ago, because I switched job assignments to one that ended that ended in time for me to make the meeting. Now, currently, I'm in between assignments, so I don't have a schedule where I have a preference, but a year ago I did have preferences. And I was surprised that I was told that most people didn't like these 7 o'clock meetings. I'm good with 7 o'clock, but normally in a committee meeting, you would plan the next meeting at the current meeting so that people could have a discussion. And if we would have had that discussion a year ago, I would have maybe picked a different job assignment. But so could I ask, does anybody have preferences for whether our meetings be 5 or 7?
We did conduct a doodle poll for availability and preference of day of the week and time to the committee.
Well, here's the deal with the doodle polls and the whole reason why, discussions by email or electronic voting is, I think, considered not good, and is we're in a deliberative body where that's best to take place. And the doodle poll never jumped out at me that people didn't like 7 o'clock. And I think you can get a better, if you have a discussion, a real discussion, live discussion about what works best, I think you learn something that you won't learn in a doodle poll. Does that make sense?
For me, it's just scheduling. It's just, where does it plug in my calendar? So I don't know what discussion there needs to be about that, Tom.
Well, so I learned like 6 months after the fact that there was that most of the people in our committee didn't like meeting this late. And we've been waffling back and forth between 5 and 7. And at the moment, that's not an issue with me, but it would have been really helpful to know what the preference is. Are we going to maybe switch back to 5 again because of a doodle poll? I'm being given conflicting information, because the last time we switched from 7 to 5, I was told nobody wanted to meet this late. Did that change? Are we now okay with 7 o'clock meetings? Should I be expecting when I pick my next shift, what should I pick a shift that gets out before 7 or starts at 7? I have no idea. And maybe, I don't know, most committees always meet at the same time at every meeting, and usually it's the same day at every meeting. And I think that would be helpful for having a schedule where everything fits in, where I know in advance whether these meetings are going to be on a Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, and whether they're going to be at 5 or 7. And so all I'm asking is for a little bit of a hunch as to where people are right now, what their preferences are right now. I'm not pushing any one time, but I think it'll be helpful to know that most of the people today would prefer 7 or 5. And I mean, I guess we could have done that in a dual poll with separate questions. What day is best? What time is best? But instead we get, several options, and there's not a real discussion where you see the bird's eye picture of what's the common denominator.
Emily has her hand raised.
Yeah, I guess I'm at us here.
It's fine. Either time is fine for me on Zoom. But when we go back in person, 7's going to be hard for me since I put children to bed. But I see everyone else likes 7, so I don't know. I'll work it out. Bring them with, get colors, something.
And I thought the doodle poll did address those things, Tom, of the times and the different days of the week, and it was kind of split. So that's why I went back and forth from Mondays at 5, which worked for half of the committee members, and then Thursday nights at 7, which worked for the other half. So I was trying to accommodate as many folks on this committee as possible. Either way is fine with me. If it's at 5, it works. It's at 7, it works for me. But I was just trying to accommodate as many folks as possible that are on this committee. So I guess whatever direction I get from the committee is when we'll have the time of these meetings.
I am curious, like how many people are missing this evening?
Nobody's night.
So Thursday is a feasible evening for everyone moving in 3 months' time, or no?
I can speak for myself. I mean, I don't have a consistent day or time of the week that works. So the earlier we have them scheduled, the better chance I have of making it work.
I guess I wondered, would it be possible to just schedule our next meeting right now since we're all actually here? Is that feasible?
It worked for me, but I know there's a lot of schedules that change for everybody else on this committee, and it sometimes changes weekly. It can even change for me. I might have a nightly meeting that isn't on my schedule right now that might end up on that night, but it would work for me. I would whatever the committee, whatever direction the committee wants to go in, it'd work for me.
I can schedule.
I'm rather flexible, so I'm actually okay with either time. So.
Could whatever's suggested in the doodle poll at least be consistent on the day of the week and the time?
I think that was the issue, Tom, is there wasn't a consistent day or time. It was pretty split.
It sounds as though if folks have enough notice, though, that it's feasible to sort of work around those things. I know that I personally, like Monday and Tuesday nights are completely impossible for me. They're an absolute no-go. So I will never, like, at least in the next 6 months, be able to attend a meeting on a Monday or Tuesday night. But I can definitely other nights.
Is there anyone else that has, pretty set, strong? Thursday night typically for me is a bad night, but if we get out far enough, I can make it work. Is there anyone else that has definitely no-go evenings? Okay.
I'm more of a no-go Tuesday nights, but we haven't scheduled things on Tuesdays, and it sounds like we've got a couple no's for Tuesday.
I haven't heard any no's for Wednesday. Does anyone have a no for a Wednesday?
I'm free after like 6-ish on Wednesdays.
And Rebecca, a lot of times we avoid Tuesdays and Thursdays because of all the other, or Tuesdays and Wednesdays because of all the other committees that others are on. Emily's on a ton of committees, so that's why it's always been like a Monday or a Thursday we've been trying to do. But again, I'm open. I'm trying to accommodate as many individuals on this committee as possible so they can be in attendance.
Well, let's aim for a Thursday then. Do we want to look? Where are we here?
So is 5 and 7 our only options for times? If we did it on a Thursday. The reason why I bring that up is I'm thinking if it's not a problem for me, but I'm thinking if there's anyone from the public that has a standard 9 to 5 job, if we did it at 6, at least give them a buffer to get home, get to where if we're holding in person, take a shower, like, whatever. Like, it gives me a chance to take my dog out. Like, if we did like 6. Just throwing it out there.
Sure. Less chance to run as late in the evening as well. Any objections to 6? No? Okay. So Troy, how far out would you like to look?
I'd leave it up to the committee members and you as the chair of what the dates, what month we're looking at.
I would assume we should look at February. Let's see here. So Thursday, February 10th. Does everyone have their schedule available? 6 p.m. Good.
February 1st, I'm okay with that.
I'm okay, especially if it's Zoom.
Okay. Does that work for you, Troy and team? Jeremy?
Yeah, right now that's available for me.
I can probably make it work, yeah.
Same here.
I do see a couple comments that a few individuals are preferring 7. And then I also see Bartlett's are we talking about Zoom or in person? At this point, Bartlett, we're still given direction by city council that all of our meetings have to be by Zoom. That might change by February. I don't think based on our COVID numbers, that's going to be the case for our next meeting, but right now we cannot meet in person yet.
Okay. So do we have consensus on Thursday, February 10th at 6? Yeah, that's great. Thank you, everybody. Great. Well, thank you everyone for engaging in city committee. And I wish everyone a safe, happy, healthy holiday season, and we'll see you in 2022.
Rebecca, I still think we need a new motion since I think that motion to adjourn was at 8:48. So I think we probably should do a new motion.
I now demand that we adjourn.
I second.
Thank you for that. With that, we're adjourned.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Vote.
Thank you, everybody.